Mother Bear saw a human baby in a 50-year-old car. What she did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Amber light illuminated patches of wild mushrooms and ferns that had reclaimed the forgotten clearing. At the center of this secluded spot sat a weathered 1972 Chevrolet Impala, its once vibrant blue paint now faded to a ghostly patina. Rust crept along the edges of the hood and doors like a slow disease, while vines had begun to wind their way through the cracked windows. The car had become as much a part of the landscape as the rocks and trees surrounding it, a relic from another time. Nora, a magnificent brown bear with thick fur that shimmered copper in the sunlight, ambled through the undergrowth with her cub, Cedar, trailing close behind. Her powerful muscles rippled beneath her coat as she moved with surprising grace for a creature of her size. She paused occasionally to sniff at fallen logs or dig her curved claws into the soft earth, searching for grubs and insects to satisfy her persistent hunger. Cedar mimicked his mother's movements, his smaller body awkward but determined as he learned the ways of survival. The forest hummed with familiar sounds, woodpeckers drilling into tree trunks, squirrels chattering as they leapt from branch to branch, the distant gurgle of a stream cutting through rock. Nora's ears twitched constantly, cataloging these everyday forest symphonies, her senses always alert for anything unusual that might signal danger or opportunity. When the first faint cry drifted through the trees, it was so soft that Nora nearly dismissed it as the mew of a fox kit or the call of an unfamiliar bird. But something about the sound made her pause, her massive head lifting as she tested the air. Cedar bumped against her hind leg, unaware of the change in his mother's demeanor. The cry came again, slightly louder this time, a distinctly human sound that sent a jolt of wariness through Nora's body. Human sounds meant danger. Humans carried the thundersticks that had killed her mate 2 seasons ago, leaving her to raise Cedar alone. Humans brought traps and fire and loud machines that tore through the forest. Every instinct told her to gather her cub and retreat deeper into the woods, away from whatever human threat lurked nearby. Yet something about this particular cry kept her rooted in place. It wasn't the shout of adult humans or their barking laughter. This sound was different, higher, more vulnerable, almost like the plaintive call Cedar had made as a newborn when he was hungry or cold. Nora's nostrils flared as she caught an unusual scent on the breeze. The unmistakable smell of humans, yes, but mixed with something else. Fear, distress, and the distinct odor of a very young human, one still dependent on others for survival. The scent was coming from the direction of the old car, that strange metal den that had sat empty in the clearing for as long as Nora had roamed these woods. Cedar sensed his mother's tension and pressed closer to her side, his small dark eyes wide with uncertainty. Nora nudged him gently with her snout, urging him toward a dense thicket of blackberry bushes where he would be hidden from view. The young bear hesitated, reluctant to leave his mother's protection, but another firm nudge convinced him to obey. He disappeared into the foliage with only the slightest rustle of leaves. With her cub temporarily safe, Nora turned her full attention to the mysterious sound. She moved forward with deliberate caution, her padded feet nearly silent against the forest floor. The crying grew louder as she approached the clearing, punctuated now by hiccuping sobs that tugged at something deep and primal within her. Each step brought her closer to the rusted car, closer to the human scent that should have sent her running in the opposite direction. The old Chevrolet sat like a sentinel in a small patch of sunlight. Its doors were closed, but one of the rear windows was partially open, just enough to allow the sounds to escape. Nora circled the vehicle once, twice, assessing it from every angle before drawing near. No other humans were visible, though their scent lingered in the air. Hours old, perhaps, but not fresh enough to suggest immediate danger. Finally, driven by a curiosity that overpowered her caution, Nora rose onto her hind legs beside the car. Her massive form towered over the vehicle as she peered through the grimy window. What she saw inside made her heart quicken with surprise. A tiny human infant, no larger than Cedar had been in his first months, was strapped into a faded car seat. Its face was red from crying, tiny fists waving in distress as tears streamed down pudgy cheeks. The baby wore a pale yellow outfit that was soaked through with sweat, its dark hair plastered to its forehead. A half-empty bottle lay on the seat beside it, the contents long since grown warm in the afternoon heat. Nora dropped back to all fours, her mind racing with conflicting instincts. Her fear of humans warred with a surge of protective feeling that confused and startled her. The infant was clearly abandoned, left alone in this metal box that was growing hotter by the minute as the sun beat down on its roof. Even Nora, with her thick fur coat, could sense the dangerous heat building inside the car. For a human cub so small and vulnerable, such conditions could prove fatal. She circled the car again, more urgently this time, looking for any way to help without getting too close to the human creation. The baby's cries had weakened slightly, a change that Nora somehow knew was not a good sign. The infant's movements were becoming sluggish, its resistance to the heat and dehydration fading with each passing minute. A rustling from the blackberry thicket told her that Cedar was growing impatient with his confinement. Soon he would emerge, curious and unafraid, potentially putting himself in danger if other humans returned. Nora needed to act quickly, though every fiber of her being screamed that approaching human things was forbidden, dangerous, against the very laws of survival that had kept her alive for so many seasons. But as the baby's cries faded to whimpers, Nora made her decision. With one powerful paw, she reached for the car's rear door handle. The metal was hot against her sensitive pads, nearly burning her as she fumbled with the unfamiliar shape. Bears weren't meant to open car doors. Their paws weren't designed for such delicate maneuvers, but maternal instinct drove Nora to try again and again. After several failed attempts, her claw caught on the latch mechanism just right, and with a rusty groan that startled nearby birds into flight, the door swung open. A wave of stifling heat rushed out, carrying with it the concentrated scent of the human infant. Milk, sweet breath, mixed with the sour smell of a soiled diaper and the salt of dried tears. The abrupt change in pressure caused the baby to startle, its eyes flying open to reveal irises the color of summer sky. For one breathless moment, bear and human infant stared at each other, separated by species and instinct, but connected by something more primal than either. The baby blinked slowly, too dehydrated and overheated to manage more than a weak whimper. Its lips were dry and cracked, tiny chest heaving with labored breaths. Without the barrier of glass between them, Nora could sense just how fragile this creature truly was. So much more vulnerable than her own cub, with no fur to protect its delicate skin, no sharp teeth or claws to defend itself. A sound from deeper in the forest caught Nora's attention. Not human, but the distinctive snap of branches that signaled the approach of something large. The scent reached her a moment later, causing her hackles to rise instinctively. Wolf? Not just any wolf, but the leader of the pack that had been encroaching on her territory all summer. A scarred gray male she had fought once before, when he'd come too close to Cedar during his first weeks of life. The wolf? Nora thought of him as Scarface, was still too far away to have noticed the open car or the strange tableau unfolding in the clearing, but he was definitely heading in their direction. His pack would not be far behind him. Wolves rarely attacked adult bears, but an unprotected human infant would be easy prey, and the pack's presence would certainly draw the attention of any human searching for the missing baby. Nora's dilemma deepened. She couldn't leave the infant exposed with wolves approaching, but taking it with her seemed impossible. And somewhere in the forest, hidden among the blackberry thickets, Cedar waited for her return, vulnerable in his own way. With a decisive grunt, Nora did something that defied all natural instincts. She leaned her massive head into the car, gently closed her jaws around the soft fabric of the infant's clothing, and with exquisite care lifted the baby from the car seat. The buckles gave way easily under the pressure, worn thin by age and weather. The infant was lighter than she expected, hardly weighing more than a large salmon in her mouth. Moving with deliberate slowness to avoid jostling her precious cargo, Nora backed away from the car. The baby made no sound, perhaps too weak or too stunned by the strange turn of events. Nora could feel its rapid heartbeat through the fabric clutched in her teeth, like the frantic wings of a trapped hummingbird. She had just cleared the car when another sound froze her in place. Not the wolf this time, but the unmistakable rumble of a vehicle approaching on the overgrown forest road. Humans were coming, and from the speed of their approach they were in a hurry. Nora's first instinct was to flee with the baby, to carry it deep into the forest where she could protect it from both wolves and humans. But some deeper wisdom held her back. Human cubs belonged with human parents, just as bear cubs belonged with bear mothers. Whatever had led to this infant being abandoned in the car, Nora sensed that these approaching humans might be searching for it. She made a split-second decision, one that went against every survival instinct she possessed. Instead of retreating into the safety of the trees, Nora gently placed the baby on a soft patch of moss near the car, in plain sight of anyone who might emerge from the approaching vehicle. Then, without a backward glance, she bounded toward the blackberry thicket where Cedar waited. She reached her cub just as the human vehicle, a large green truck with flashing lights on top, burst into the clearing. Cedar whimpered in confusion, as his mother urgently nudged him deeper into the underbrush, away from the commotion. Together, they retreated a safe distance, but Nora could not bring herself to leave entirely. Something compelled her to watch, to make sure the human infant would be safe. From their hiding place beneath a fallen log, Nora and Cedar observed as two humans in dark green uniforms leapt from the truck. A male and female, both wearing shiny badges and carrying small black devices that they spoke into with urgent voices. The female spotted the baby first, crying out in surprise as she rushed toward the moss-covered spot where Nora had placed the infant. "Lucas, I found him! Oh my God, I found baby Oliver!" she shouted, dropping to her knees beside the infant. "He's alive, but he's not looking good. Radio for an ambulance." The male, Lucas, was already speaking rapidly into his device while scanning the surrounding forest with wary eyes. "This is Ranger Bennett. We've located the Thompson baby at the old Westridge trailhead. Looks like someone left him in an abandoned vehicle. Child is alive, but needs immediate medical attention. And send backup. Whoever took him might still be in the area." Nora watched as the female ranger cradled the infant, wrapping it in a silver blanket she pulled from a pack at her waist. The baby stirred slightly at the touch, a good sign that it was responding to care. The rangers moved with practiced efficiency, the female keeping the baby close while the male continued to search the area, his hand resting on something holstered at his hip, one of the thunder sticks that humans used to kill from a distance. His gaze swept across the forest, pausing briefly on the fallen log where Nora and Cedar were hidden. For one heart-stopping moment, Nora thought he had spotted them, but his eyes moved on without recognition. Humans rarely saw what they weren't expecting to see, and a mother bear hiding in plain sight was clearly not what the ranger was looking for. More humans arrived soon after, men and women in different uniforms, some carrying bags of equipment, others with loud machines that made Cedar tremble against his mother's side. Nora remained absolutely still, watching as the infant was transferred to yet another human who wore clothes the color of spring leaves. This new human placed strange clear objects over the baby's face and listened to its chest with a shiny tool. Moderate dehydration, elevated temperature but responsive, the green-clothed human announced. We need to get him to County General right away. How long was he out here? Missing persons report was filed yesterday evening, the female ranger, Bennett, replied. Mother reported that her ex-boyfriend took the baby during what was supposed to be a supervised visit. We've been searching the forest since dawn, but this area wasn't on our initial grid. If that car door hadn't been open, we might have missed him entirely. Nora felt a strange sense of satisfaction at these words. Her interference, unnatural as it had been, had saved the human cub's life. The infant would return to its proper mother, just as Cedar stayed safe at her side. The natural order was being restored. As the humans prepared to leave, loading the baby into a white vehicle with flashing lights, the male ranger paused by the abandoned car, studying it with narrowed eyes. "Joanna, come look at this," he called to his partner. "These marks on the door handle, they look like—" "Claw marks," the female ranger finished, joining him by the car. "Big ones." She knelt to examine something on the ground, her fingers hovering over indentations in the soft soil. "And these are definitely bear tracks. A large female, I'd guess, based on the size." Lucas straightened abruptly, his hand moving to the thunderstick at his hip as he scanned the forest with renewed alertness. If there's a bear in the area that's showing interest in humans, especially children, we need to alert the Wildlife Division. That's an immediate threat to public safety. Nora's heart quickened with fear. She understood enough of human behavior to know when they perceived a threat. If they believed she was dangerous to human cubs, they would hunt her. They would take Cedar from her, or worse. Joanna frowned, studying the scene more carefully. It doesn't add up, though. If a bear found the baby, why isn't there any? She hesitated, glancing toward the white vehicle where the infant was being tended to. Why isn't there any blood? No signs of aggression at all. And look at these tracks. They lead away from the car, but then circle back to this spot where we found Oliver. Almost like— "Like what?" Lucas asked, impatient to leave the clearing. "Like it was protecting him," Joanna said quietly, almost to herself. She shook her head. "That's crazy, of course. Bears don't rescue human babies, but something about this scene feels deliberate." "You've been watching too many nature documentaries," Lucas scoffed, already walking back to their truck. "The bear was probably just curious about the car, accidentally opened the door, and got spooked when the baby started crying. We got lucky, that's all." Joanna nodded slowly, but Nora could see that the female ranger wasn't entirely convinced by her partner's explanation. As the humans prepared to leave, Joanna turned toward the forest once more, her gaze sweeping across the trees as if searching for something she couldn't quite see. "Whatever or whoever you are," she said softly, "thank you." Then she was gone, climbing into the truck with her partner. Within minutes, all the human vehicles had departed, leaving the clearing quieter than before. Only the abandoned car remained, its open door a reminder of the strange events that had unfolded. Nora waited until she was certain all humans had left before emerging from hiding. Cedar bounded from the underbrush, eager to explore now that the danger had passed. Together, they approached the car once more. The scent of the human infant lingered, but it was already fading, replaced by the familiar smells of the forest. With one massive paw, Nora pushed the car door closed. It seemed important somehow to leave things as they had been before. As if by erasing the signs of her interference, she could return to her normal life as a bear, foraging, teaching Cedar to hunt, preparing for the coming winter. But as they turned to leave the clearing, Nora sensed that something fundamental had changed. The human female, Joanna, had seen what the others couldn't or wouldn't. She had recognized, if only for a moment, that the natural world was not as simple as humans believed it to be. That the line between human and animal, between reason and instinct, was not as clear as they liked to think. A twig snapped in the distance, a deliberate sound that instantly put Nora on alert. The wolves had not abandoned their approach during the human commotion. They had simply waited, biding their time until the clearing was empty once more. And now Scarface was drawing near, likely curious about the lingering human scents and the strange events he had witnessed from a distance. Nora nudged Cedar toward a dense stand of pines, away from the direction of the wolf pack. They needed to put distance between themselves and this place before night fell. But even as they retreated deeper into the familiar embrace of the forest, Nora knew that their lives had become entangled with the human world in ways she couldn't yet understand. Behind them, as shadows lengthened across the abandoned car, a figure stepped out from behind a massive oak tree where he had hidden during the ranger's search. He was thin and wild-eyed, with several days' growth of beard darkening his gaunt face. His clothes were dirty and torn, evidence of a desperate flight through the forest. This was the man who had taken the baby, the ex-boyfriend the rangers had mentioned. He had returned to the car, intending to retrieve the infant before continuing his journey north, only to find his plans destroyed by the unexpected arrival of the search party. Now he stood in the empty clearing, his face contorted with rage and disbelief as he stared at the abandoned vehicle that no longer contained his hostage. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, the man's gaze fell on the fresh bear tracks surrounding the car. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. There was still a way to turn this situation to his advantage, a new plan forming in his desperate mind that would soon draw Nora and Cedar into a far more dangerous encounter with the human world. Ryan Thompson, the baby's mother's ex-boyfriend, had not planned to kidnap little Oliver. 6 months ago, he had been a respectable construction worker with a decent apartment and a promising relationship with Melissa Thompson, a single mother who'd captured his heart with her resilience and gentle spirit. But then came the layoffs at the construction company, followed by the gambling debts he'd accumulated trying to make ends meet, and finally, the desperate plea to the wrong people for money. Now, he owed the kind of men who didn't accept excuses, and the only leverage he had was Melissa's unconditional love for her son. The plan had been simple. Take Oliver during the supervised visit, demand that Melissa withdraw her life savings and meet him with the cash, then use the money to pay off his debts. He hadn't accounted for the baby crying continuously, attracting attention at every stop. He hadn't planned on the forest rangers setting up roadblocks on all major highways out of the county, and he certainly hadn't expected to panic and leave Oliver in an abandoned car while he scouted ahead for a safe route, only to find himself unable to return when police vehicles swarmed the area. Now, the baby was gone, returned to Melissa, and Ryan was still in danger, perhaps even more so. Without Oliver, he had nothing to negotiate with. Without money, he was as good as dead when his creditors caught up with him. Unless... Ryan pulled a crumpled flyer from his pocket. something he'd grabbed from a tourist information board days earlier without much thought. "Wildlife Tours," it announced in bold letters. "See the majestic creatures of Westridge Forest, bears, wolves, deer, and more." Below was a list of prices, expensive prices, that tourists were willing to pay for guided excursions into the wilderness. People paid good money to see bears in the wild, but what would they pay for a bear cub? Exotic animal collectors, private zoos, circuses. There were markets for such things, black markets that wouldn't ask questions about where the cub came from or who was selling it. Ryan had seen the mother bear and her cub watching from the underbrush. The rangers had been too focused on the baby to notice, but Ryan, hidden nearby, had observed everything. He'd seen how careful the bear had been with Oliver, how she'd placed him gently on the moss where he would be found. Such a bear, one that showed unusual behavior around humans, would be valuable. But her cub would be priceless. With renewed purpose, Ryan moved toward the tree line, following the tracks that Nora and Cedar had left in the soft earth. The forest was growing dark, shadows deepening between the ancient pines. But Ryan was beyond fear now. Desperation drove him forward, one hand clutching the small caliber pistol he'd stolen from Melissa's bedside drawer, her protection against home intruders, now a tool for his survival. As night settled fully over the forest, Nora and Cedar made their way toward their favorite sleeping spot, a shallow cave beneath an overhanging rock ledge that offered protection from rain and predators alike. Cedar was unusually subdued, perhaps sensing his mother's lingering unease. The day's events had disrupted their normal routine, and the scent of wolf still hung in the air, a constant reminder of danger. They stopped at a small stream to drink, the cool water soothing after hours of tension. Nora kept her senses alert, ears constantly swiveling to catch any unusual sounds. But it was Cedar who first detected something amiss, his head lifting suddenly from the water, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that didn't belong in their forest home. Human. Male. The same scent that had lingered around the abandoned car, but without the baby's milk-sweet smell to soften it. This human reeked of sweat and fear, and something sharper, more chemical, scents that Nora associated with danger. A twig snapped nearby, too close. Nora rounded on Cedar, nudging him roughly toward a dense thicket of undergrowth. The cub resisted for a moment, confused by his mother's sudden urgency, but another firm push sent him scrambling for cover. Nora positioned herself between the hidden cub and the approaching human, her massive body tense with protective instinct. Ryan emerged from between two towering pines, his eyes widening at the sight of the mother bear standing beside the stream. Even in the gathering darkness, he could see that she was magnificent, far larger than he had imagined when observing from a distance. Her fur caught the last remnants of twilight, glowing copper against the darkening forest. For a moment, Ryan forgot his desperate plan, struck by the raw power and natural dignity of the creature before him. Then he remembered why he was here. The cub must be nearby. Bear mothers rarely strayed far from their young. He just needed to locate it, somehow separate it from its mother, and escape before the forest rangers expanded their search grid to this area. "Hey there, Mama Bear," Ryan called softly, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "I just want to borrow your little one for a while. Nothing personal." Nora didn't understand the human words, but she recognized the tone. Soft, deceptively gentle, meant to lull her into complacency. It was the same tone humans used when setting traps or approaching with thundersticks. She responded with a warning huff, lifting her head to display her full height. Ryan took an involuntary step backward, his confidence faltering. The bear was easily twice his weight, with claws that could disembowel him in a single swipe. The small pistol suddenly seemed woefully inadequate, but desperation drove him forward anyway, his eyes scanning the nearby vegetation for signs of the cub. A rustle in the thicket to his right drew his attention. There, a flash of movement, smaller than the mother bear but unmistakably the same shape. The cub was hiding exactly where he'd expected, and now he knew where to focus his efforts. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in waxed paper. Beef jerky, his last bit of food. The smell would be irresistible to a young bear still learning to forage. He unwrapped it slowly, the crackling paper drawing Nora's attention immediately. "You want this?" Ryan asked, waving the jerky in Nora's direction. "Come on, it's a peace offering." He tossed a small piece toward her, and despite her wariness, the scent was tempting after a long day with little opportunity to feed. Nora sniffed the air cautiously, torn between hunger and suspicion. The jerky lay on a rock between them, its rich aroma filling the clearing. While Nora's attention was divided, Ryan began inching sideways, moving gradually closer to the thicket where the cedar was hidden. His plan was taking shape: distract the mother with food while he used a tranquilizer dart he'd stolen from a veterinary clinic to sedate the cub. The dart gun was tucked into his waistband, loaded and ready. What Ryan didn't realize was that he wasn't the only predator stalking through the darkening forest that evening. Drawn by the scent of the jerky and the commotion at the stream, Scarface and 3 members of his pack had circled around through the trees. The wolves moved like shadows, their gray forms nearly invisible in the twilight, positioning themselves between Ryan and his potential escape route. Cedar, meanwhile, was growing increasingly anxious in his hiding place. The human's strange behavior confused and frightened him. He could smell his mother's tension, the unfamiliar human, and now the approaching wolves. Too many threats converging at once. A whimper escaped him before he could suppress it, a sound that instantly drew Ryan's attention directly to his hiding spot. "There you are," Ryan whispered, changing direction to move toward the thicket. Nora reacted instantly, reading the human's intent in his altered stance. With a roar that seemed to shake the very ground, she charged. Not directly at Ryan, but at a point between him and Cedar's hiding place. The message was unmistakable. "Come no closer to my cub." Ryan stumbled backward in alarm, tripping over an exposed root and landing hard on his back. The pistol flew from his grasp, disappearing into the underbrush. Frantically, he scrambled to his feet, reaching for the tranquilizer gun instead. His fingers closed around it just as Nora rose to her full height, towering over him on her hind legs, her forepaws extended as if to embrace him in a deadly hug. Time seemed to suspend in that moment. The human and bear locked in a tableau of primal confrontation, their silhouettes stark against the last glow of twilight. Ryan raised the dart gun with shaking hands, knowing he had just one shot. Before he could fire, a bone-chilling howl shattered the silence. Scarface had made his move, sensing weakness in both the human and the bear. The alpha wolf launched himself from the shadows, aiming not for Nora or Ryan, but for the thicket where Cedar was hidden. The wolf had identified the most vulnerable target with uncanny precision. Nora dropped to all fours and pivoted with shocking speed, abandoning her confrontation with Ryan to intercept the charging wolf. They collided with a sound like thunder, fur and fang and claw in violent motion. The other wolves hung back, waiting for their alpha to create an opening they could exploit. In the chaos, Ryan saw his opportunity. While Nora was occupied with defending her cub from Scarface, he could make his move. He adjusted his aim, finger tightening on the trigger of the dart gun as he centered it on the bear's exposed flank. A shout from the forest behind him broke his concentration. "Forest Service, drop your weapon," Ranger Joanna Bennett emerged from the trees, her service revolver trained on Ryan. Her partner Lucas was close behind, aiming a powerful flashlight that cut through the gathering darkness like a knife, illuminating the extraordinary scene. The desperate man with a tranquilizer gun. The mother bear locked in combat with a wolf twice the size of any Lucas had seen before, and the bear cub cowering in the bushes, caught in a triangle of human and animal conflict. Ryan hesitated only a fraction of a second before swinging the dart gun toward Joanna instead. It was a fatal mistake. Lucas fired first, a warning shot that cracked through the forest like lightning, startling birds from their roosts and sending smaller creatures scurrying for cover. The sudden noise confused and frightened all the combatants. Scarface broke away from Nora, retreating several paces with hackles raised and teeth bared. Nora herself dropped into a defensive posture, placing her body squarely between the humans and Cedar's hiding spot. And Ryan, seeing his last chance slipping away, made a desperate lunge toward the thicket where the bear cub was hidden. "Stop!" Joanna shouted, but Ryan was beyond reason. He reached the edge of the bushes just as Cedar, panicked by the gunshot and the surrounding chaos, burst from cover in the opposite direction. Time compressed into a series of fragmented images. Cedar bolting across the clearing, Ryan diving after him with outstretched hands, Scarface changing direction mid-stride to intercept the fleeing cub, and Nora, magnificent in her maternal fury, charging to protect her offspring. The collision was inevitable, four trajectories converging at a single point beside the stream. Ryan's fingers just brushed Cedar's fur as the wolf's jaws snapped inches from the cub's flank. Nora's massive paw swept through the air, catching Ryan's shoulder with enough force to spin him completely around and send him sprawling into the shallow water. Scarface yelped as Nora's other paw connected with his muzzle, driving him back toward his waiting pack. Through it all, Joanna and Lucas could only watch. Weapons ready but useless in the swirl of motion too fast and chaotic for human reflexes to track. Their training hadn't prepared them for anything like this. A human criminal, a mother bear, a wolf pack, and a terrified cub, all fighting for survival in different ways. When the chaos subsided seconds later, the tableau had been rearranged. Ryan lay motionless in the stream, blood seeping from a gash in his shoulder where Nora's claws had connected. Cedar cowered beneath his mother's massive form, shivering with fear but unharmed. Scarface and his pack had retreated to the edge of the clearing, still present but maintaining a wary distance. And the Rangers stood frozen, unsure how to proceed in this unprecedented situation. It was Joanna who broke the standoff, slowly lowering her weapon and speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Lucas, call for backup and medical assistance. This man needs attention before he bleeds out." She took a careful step forward, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "And contact Wildlife Division. Tell them we have a unusual situation with the local bear population." "Unusual?" Lucas hissed, his gun still trained on Nora. "That bear just mauled a man. Protocol says we have to put it down, especially since it's shown aggression toward humans." "That's not what happened, and you know it," Joanna replied firmly, never taking her eyes off Nora. She was protecting her cub, from him and from the wolves, the same way she protected that baby earlier today. "You don't know that for sure." "I know what I saw," Joanna cut him off. "And I'm not signing the order to destroy an animal for defending her young against a kidnapper who was likely trying to take her cub too. Now, make the call, and then help me with first aid for this idiot before he becomes the first fatality in my section of the forest." Lucas hesitated, then holstered his weapon with a frustrated sigh. "Your career if you're wrong about this bear," he muttered, reaching for his radio. While Lucas called for backup, Joanna kept her attention divided between Ryan's still form and the mother bear, who watched them with intelligent, wary eyes. Slowly, giving Nora plenty of time to react, Joanna removed her jacket and approached the stream. "I'm just going to help him," she said softly, though she knew the bear couldn't understand her words. "We're not here for you or your cub. You saved a human child today. I'm not going to forget that." Nora observed the female ranger's careful movements as she knelt beside the unconscious man and pressed her wadded-up jacket against his bleeding shoulder. The human female's voice was gentle, her posture non-threatening. She smelled different from the male human, less fear, more calm determination. Gradually, as the immediate danger to Cedar subsided, Nora's aggressive stance relaxed slightly. She huffed once, nudging her cub toward the far side of the clearing, away from both the humans and the lurking wolves. Cedar needed no encouragement, scrambling through the underbrush with his mother close behind. They didn't flee the area entirely, though. Something kept Nora nearby, watching from the shelter of the trees as more humans arrived with flashing lights and loud voices. The injured human was placed on a flat board and carried away. The wolves, perhaps intimidated by the growing human presence, melted away into the deeper forest until only Scarface remained, a gray shadow observing from across the clearing before finally slinking away. Throughout it all, the female ranger, Joanna, kept glancing toward the spot where Nora and Cedar were hidden, as if she sensed their continued presence. Once, when no one was watching, she placed something on a flat rock near the stream, several pieces of dried fruit and nuts from her pack, before walking away to join the other humans. Dawn was breaking by the time the forest fell quiet again. The humans had departed, taking their lights and noise with them, but they had left strange scents behind: antiseptic, rubber, metal, and the lingering odor of the injured human's blood. Cautiously, Nora led Cedar back to the stream for a drink, both of them exhausted from the night's events. As Cedar lapped at the cool water, Nora approached the rock where Joanna had left her offering. She sniffed the dried fruit carefully before taking a piece in her mouth. It was sweet and pleasant. Not as satisfying as fresh berries or fish, but a welcome supplement after a night without proper foraging. More significant than the food itself was what it represented: a gesture of peace from a human who had recognized Nora not as a dangerous predator to be feared and eliminated, but as a fellow mother who had acted out of the same protective instinct that humans valued in themselves. Miles away, at the county sheriff's department, Joanna Bennett faced her supervisor across a cluttered desk. Captain Elena Rodriguez scrolled through the preliminary report on her computer, her expression growing increasingly skeptical as she read. "Let me get this straight," Rodriguez said finally, leaning back in her chair. "You believe that the same bear who rescued the Thompson baby also defended both her cub and an unconscious criminal from a wolf pack, showing what you describe as unusual discernment and restraint in the process." "That's correct, Captain," Joanna replied, standing straight despite her exhaustion. "In both instances, the bear demonstrated behavior that goes beyond typical wildlife patterns. I believe she represents a unique opportunity for study rather than a threat to be eliminated." Rodriguez rubbed her temples. "Bennett, you know I respect your judgment, but this sounds like the plot of a Disney movie, not a wildlife management issue. Bears are not sentient moral actors. They don't rescue babies or make ethical distinctions between kidnappers and rangers. With all due respect, Captain, we don't actually know the full cognitive or emotional capabilities of bears," Joanna countered. "Recent research suggests that many animals possess far more complex intelligence than we've previously acknowledged. and the fact remains that this particular bear had multiple opportunities to harm humans, including a defenseless infant, and chose not to. Chose not to, Rodriguez repeated flatly. Or perhaps just wasn't hungry at the time? The evidence doesn't support that interpretation, Joanna insisted. The bear deliberately opened the car door, removed the baby from danger, and placed it where we would find it. Later, she specifically targeted Thompson, the threat, while leaving Lucas and me alone, despite our proximity to her cub. Rodriguez sighed heavily. What exactly are you proposing here, Bennett? Because standard protocol for a bear that's had multiple human encounters, violent or otherwise, is relocation at best, euthanasia at worst. I'm proposing we bring in Dr. Elijah Chen from the university's Wildlife Behavior Department. He's been requesting permission to conduct non-invasive observational studies in our forest for years. This bear and her cub would be ideal subjects for his research on interspecies interaction and animal cognition. And if this bear isn't the gentle soul you believe her to be, if she attacks a hiker next week, then I'll personally sign the order for her removal, Joanna said firmly. But I don't believe that will happen. This isn't just sentimental anthropomorphizing, Captain. There's something special about this bear, something worth understanding before we rush to judgment. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Fine. Contact Dr. Chen and set up temporary permits for his research team. But I want tracking collars on both the mother and cub, standard warning signs posted in the area, and daily monitoring reports. One hint of aggressive behavior toward humans, and we go back to protocol. Understood? Completely, Joanna agreed, unable to keep a small smile from her face. Thank you, Captain. As she left the sheriff's department, Joanna's phone rang, an unknown number that she almost ignored before curiosity got the better of her. Ranger Bennett speaking, she answered, sliding into her truck. Ranger Bennett, this is Melissa Thompson. The voice was soft but steady. The hospital gave me your name as the officer who found my son. I wanted to thank you personally. Joanna settled back against the seat, unexpectedly moved by the call. Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad Oliver is recovering well. But truthfully, I can't take full credit for finding him. It was a team effort. The doctors said he wouldn't have survived another hour in that hot car, Melissa continued, her voice catching slightly. They called it a miracle that someone opened the door when they did. The other ranger, Lucas, he mentioned something about bear tracks around the car. Is that true? Joanna hesitated, weighing her response carefully. The official report mentioned the bear tracks as an incidental detail, nothing more. But something told her that Melissa Thompson deserved the truth, however improbable it might seem. Yes, there was evidence that a bear opened the car door shortly before we arrived, she said finally. A mother bear with a cub. We've been monitoring her since the incident. Silence filled the line for several beats. A mother bear saved my baby, Melissa said finally, wonder and gratitude mingling in her voice. Is there any way I can help protect her in return? Ryan told the police he was planning to capture her cub to sell. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to them after what she did for Oliver. Actually, Joanna replied, a plan forming in her mind. There might be. We're setting up a research project to study this particular bear family, and funding is always an issue with these initiatives. A public statement from you about your support for the project could make a real difference. I'll do more than make a statement, Melissa said with sudden conviction. I'm going to start a foundation, the Oliver Bear Protection Fund or something like that. My family has some money, and after what happened, well, I need to do something positive with this experience. By the time Joanna ended the call, The first rays of sunlight were streaming through her truck windows. She was exhausted but energized by the unexpected turn of events. As she drove toward home and a well-deserved rest, her thoughts returned to the mother bear, to Nora, as she had privately named her in her field notes. In the forest, unaware of the human plans forming around her, Nora led Cedar to their den beneath the rock ledge. The cub was subdued after their frightening night, curling against his mother's warm side as soon as they settled into the familiar hollow. Nora groomed him gently, her tongue smoothing his rumpled fur as she checked him for injuries. Finding him whole and unharmed, she finally allowed herself to relax, her massive body curving protectively around her offspring as they both drifted towards sleep. Their world had changed in ways Nora couldn't fully comprehend, the boundaries between bear existence and human concerns blurring in unprecedented ways. But some things remained constant. The warmth of the den, the rhythmic sound of Cedar's breathing, and the fierce, unconditional devotion that drove her to protect not just her own cub, but a human infant whose vulnerability had awakened something extraordinary within her. As sleep claimed her, Nora's last conscious awareness was of distant human voices and the strange conviction that, somehow, their futures were now intertwined with the complex, unpredictable world of humans. Whether this would bring good or ill, only time would tell. 3 days later, Dr. Elijah Chen stood beside Joanna at the edge of the clearing where the confrontation with Ryan Thompson had occurred. Through high-powered binoculars, they observed Nora and Cedar foraging among blueberry bushes on the opposite slope, unaware of the human scrutiny. "Extraordinary," Chen murmured, lowering the binoculars to make a note in his field journal. "Her behavior around the trap cameras has been remarkably consistent with your observations. She shows none of the typical avoidance reactions we'd expect. It's almost as if she's deliberately posing for the cameras at times." "I told you she was special," Joanna replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "Have you reviewed the footage from yesterday?" "The interaction with the deer family?" Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Multiple times, the way she redirected her cub away from the fawn, despite it being potential prey, that level of interspecies consideration is extremely rare. I've submitted a preliminary paper to the Journal of Wildlife Behavior already. My colleagues are skeptical, of course, but the video evidence is compelling." He hesitated, glancing at Joanna sideways. "There's something else, something I haven't included in my official reports yet because it sounds too far-fetched. But yesterday, while observing from the blind near the stream, I watched her deliberately wash berries before feeding them to her cub. Bears don't do that, Ranger Bennett. There's no evolutionary or behavioral precedent for it. She's learning," Joanna whispered, a shiver running down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. "Adapting in ways we've never documented before." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "I believe she's what we call a threshold animal in emerging cognitive studies, a creature existing at the boundary between instinctual behavior and something approaching reasoned thought. The incident with the human infant may have been a catalyst, somehow accelerating cognitive processes that were already present but dormant." They watched in companionable silence as Nora showed Cedar how to strip bark from a fallen log to find the grubs hiding underneath. The cub was growing quickly, his once awkward movements becoming more coordinated with each passing week. Soon, winter would arrive, bringing hibernation and a temporary end to Dr. Chen's observations. "What happens after your 6-month research permit expires?" Joanna asked, already dreading the answer. Chen sighed. "It depends on the evidence we gather and whether I can secure additional funding. The Oliver Bear Protection Fund has been incredibly generous, but university research requires peer review and reproducible results. One exceptional bear doesn't change wildlife management policy overnight. And if someone decides she's still a threat to public safety, then we hope the evidence we've collected is compelling enough to argue otherwise, Chen replied. But ultimately, these forests belong as much to the humans who visit them as to the creatures who live here. Coexistence requires compromise on both sides. The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Joanna's phone. A text message from Captain Rodriguez. Check your email. Thompson, case closed. Perp took plea deal. No trial needed. Joanna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Without a trial, there would be less media attention focused on the forest, less scrutiny of the unusual bear behavior that had been documented. It meant more time for Dr. Chen's research to progress without interference. Good news? Chen inquired. The best kind, Joanna confirmed. It means Nora and Cedar can continue their lives without becoming tabloid sensations or tourist attractions. Across the clearing, Nora suddenly lifted her head, ears pivoting towards something beyond human hearing range. A moment later, Cedar followed suit, abandoning his exploration of the log to press close to his mother's side. Joanna and Chen tensed, scanning the forest edge for whatever had alerted the bears. Scarface emerged from the shadows, his gray coat silvered by the afternoon light. The wolf was alone this time, his pack nowhere in sight. He moved with the cautious dignity of a seasoned predator, keeping a respectful distance from Nora while making no attempt to hide his presence. Is he hunting? Chen whispered, reaching slowly for his camera. Joanna shook her head, equally confused by the wolf's behavior. He's acting more like he's checking in. Indeed, the wolf seemed to be deliberately making his presence known without presenting a threat. Nora watched him warily, but made no aggressive moves. Cedar peeked curiously from behind his mother's massive form, his natural fear tempered by obvious curiosity. For several minutes, the unlikely tableau held. Mother bear, cub, and lone wolf, acknowledging each other across the clearing. Then, with a flick of his tail that seemed almost ceremonial, Scarface turned and melted back into the forest. Did we just witness some kind of interspecies communication? Chen breathed, reviewing the footage he'd captured. Territorial boundaries being established without conflict. Or maybe just mutual respect between two intelligent predators who have learned they can share the forest without fighting, Joanna suggested. As autumn deepened into winter, the forest transformed. Leaves fell in a riot of color, painting the ground in russet and gold before decaying into the rich earth. Frost rimed the edges of the stream each morning, melting away by noon only to return with the setting sun. The rhythms of the forest shifted as creatures prepared for the coming cold, some departing for warmer climes, others storing food, and still others preparing for the long sleep. Nora and Cedar spent these weeks in a feeding frenzy, bulking up for hibernation. They roamed further each day, sometimes crossing paths with hikers who, thanks to the educational signs Joanna had posted, knew to maintain a respectful distance. Videos of Oliver's bear began appearing on social media, always showing the same remarkable behavior. A mother bear who seemed uniquely aware of human presence without showing aggression. Dr. Chen's research team expanded, bringing specialized equipment to monitor Nora's brain activity during various tasks. They set up cognitive tests disguised as feeding puzzles, marveling at how quickly she solved problems that would have stumped other bears. The scientific community remained divided on how to interpret these results, some arguing for extraordinary intelligence, others suggesting more mundane explanations like conditioning or coincidence. Through it all, Joanna visited the forest daily, her bond with Nora growing despite the necessary distance between them. She never attempted to feed or touch the bear, respecting the wildness that was Nora's birthright. But sometimes, when she sat quietly at the edge of the clearing, Nora would settle nearby with Cedar, as if enjoying the companionship of another maternal presence in the forest. The first heavy snowfall came in late November, blanketing the forest in pristine white. It was around this time that Nora and Cedar disappeared from their usual haunts, retreating to their den for the winter's rest. The research equipment was carefully removed, the observation blinds dismantled until spring. The forest grew quiet, its secrets buried beneath snow and silence. Melissa Thompson visited the ranger station on Christmas Eve, bringing her son Oliver, now a healthy, bright-eyed toddler, to meet the woman who had coordinated his rescue. They sat in Joanna's small office, surrounded by maps of the forest and framed photographs of wildlife. "He won't remember any of it, of course," Melissa said, watching Oliver play with a stuffed bear Joanna had given him. "But I want him to know the story when he's older. Not just about Ryan's betrayal, but about the extraordinary things that happened afterward, about the bear who saved him. The foundation you established has already made a difference," Joanna told her. "Dr. Chen's research is changing how we understand animal cognition, and the educational programs for visitors are reducing negative human-wildlife interactions throughout the park." Melissa smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I keep thinking about what it means, a wild animal choosing to help a human child. It gives me hope, you know, that maybe the boundaries we create between species, between ourselves and the natural world, aren't as fixed as we believe." "I think about that too," Joanna admitted, "especially on days when the human world seems particularly harsh or senseless. It helps to remember that kindness can emerge from unexpected places." They talked until twilight when Melissa had to leave for a family dinner. As Joanna walked them to their car, Oliver clutched his stuffed bear tightly, waving goodbye with his free hand. Something about his innocent gesture, combined with the snow-hushed forest and the knowledge that Nora and Cedar were sleeping safely in their den, filled Joanna with a profound sense of peace. Winter passed slowly, the forest held in frozen suspension. Joanna continued her patrols, sometimes snowshoeing past the area where she knew Nora's den was hidden, careful never to approach too closely or disturb the hibernating bears. Dr. Chen returned to the university to analyze data and write papers, his preliminary findings causing ripples of excitement and skepticism through the scientific community. When spring finally arrived, painting the forest with new green and the delicate blossoms of wildflowers, Joanna found herself watching the slopes with anxious anticipation. Had Nora and Cedar survived the winter? Would they remember the humans who had studied them? Would Nora's unusual behaviors continue, or would she revert to typical bear instincts after months of hibernation? The answer came on a misty April morning. Joanna was checking trail markers after a particularly vicious spring storm when movement caught her eye. A large shape emerging from between two fallen logs on the opposite hillside. Nora looked thinner but strong, her winter coat beginning to shed in patches as her summer fur grew in underneath. And beside her, significantly larger than when Joanna had last seen him, trotted Cedar, his adolescent curiosity evident in every movement. Joanna froze, not wanting to startle them. But Nora had already spotted her. The bear paused, head lifted as if considering something of great importance. Then, deliberately, she led Cedar down the slope toward the stream that separated them from the ranger. They stopped at the water's edge, close enough that Joanna could see the intelligence in Nora's dark eyes, the mixture of wariness and recognition that seemed impossible for a wild animal, and yet was unmistakably there. Cedar splashed playfully in the shallow water, untroubled by the human presence his mother had clearly deemed safe. For one breathless moment, human and bear regarded each other across the narrow stream. Two mothers of a sort, one to a forest ecosystem she was sworn to protect, the other to a cub who represented the future of his kind. No words were needed. No scientific instruments could have measured the understanding that passed between them. Then, with a soft huff that stirred the morning mist, Nora turned and led Cedar back up the slope, disappearing into the emerald embrace of the spring forest. They would return to the clearing many times in the coming months, allowing Dr. Chen's team to continue their observations. They would become the most studied bear family in scientific history, the subject of documentaries and academic papers and endless debates about animal consciousness. But for Joanna, standing alone by the stream with the memory of Nora's gaze still fresh in her mind, those future developments mattered less than the simple truth she had just witnessed, that compassion could transcend the boundaries of species, that understanding could grow in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the most profound connections were formed in moments of unexpected grace. 10 years later, long after Nora had passed peacefully of old age and Cedar had established his own territory in a distant part of the forest, Joanna Bennett stood at the edge of the original clearing. Beside her, a lanky boy of 11 gazed wide-eyed at the ancient car, now deliberately preserved as a landmark, its rusted frame partially reclaimed by moss and vines. "This is where it happened?" Oliver Thompson asked, his voice hushed with appropriate reverence. "Where the bear found me." "Right here," Joanna confirmed, her hair now streaked with silver, but her ranger's uniform as crisp as ever. "Your mother invited me to your birthday every year, but this is the first time you've been old enough to visit the actual site." Oliver nodded solemnly, taking in the clearing with eyes that seemed far older than his years. "Mom says I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for Nora, that she was special, different from other bears." She was, Joanna agreed, remembering the intelligence that had shone in those dark eyes, the deliberate gentleness of those massive paws. Dr. Chen wrote entire books about her, changed the way we think about animal cognition, but the most important thing she did was much simpler. "What was that?" Oliver asked, looking up at her with genuine curiosity. Joanna smiled, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder. She reminded us that boundaries, between human and animal, between instinct and compassion, are never as fixed as we think they are. That kindness can emerge from the most unexpected sources. She glanced toward the edge of the clearing, where the forest stretched vast and green beneath the summer sun. For just a moment, she could almost imagine Nora there, watching them with that familiar mixture of caution and intelligence. The bear was long gone, of course, her bones now part of the forest floor. Her spirit returned to the wilderness from which she had emerged. But her legacy lived on, in the research her extraordinary behavior had inspired, in the protection now afforded to her kind, in the life of the boy who stood looking up at Joanna with wondering eyes, and in the stories they would continue to tell about the day a mother bear saw a human baby in a 50-year-old car and did something truly shocking. She saved him,